thank you again, and thank you to the panel that just ended. I'd like to introduce, without much ado, our next panel, eyeing the public policy landscape and the current state of affairs, which always is an important tag, obviously. So Christina Greer, Associate Professor of Political Science here at Fordham University, will be moderating, and we will follow her lead in the outline, but I think there will be questions at the end of the presentation. So Christina, thank you so much, and take it away.
Great, thank you so much. Good afternoon. Wait, is it morning? Still morning. Time is a construct. Good morning. I don't want to get Marcia Fudge on you guys, but I'm going to try that one more time. Good morning. Thank you. I'm very, very excited to be here so we can have a really great discussion eyeing the public policy landscape, the current state of affairs. I want to thank all of the organizers. We all know just a seamless conference means there's a lot of hard work that goes on behind the scenes. So I just want to thank everyone involved, and especially my colleague, Sarah Lockhart, for inviting me to moderate this panel. I'm briefly going to introduce our esteemed panelists. We'll have a really robust discussion, but we really want to spend some time in making sure you all have your questions answered. So we're going to have quite a bit of time for Q&A if possible before we're the ones who stand between you all and lunch. So we understand that that is the situation. So I'm just going to go in the order that I have you all in the program. Murad Awawdeh, excuse me, dear friend, is a nationally acclaimed strategist and organizer who's been leading the charge for immigrants across New York and the nation. Murad, the son of Palestinian immigrants, has dedicated over 2 decades of his life fighting for low-income communities of color. He's the president and CEO of New York Immigration Coalition, and he leads the nation's oldest and largest immigrant rights organization. Say hi, Murad.
Hello.
We've got Dylan Corbett, the founding executive director of the Hope Border Institute, who has over 15 years of experience working in international and human development globally and in the borderlands. Dylan has served as an official at the Vatican's dicastery for promoting integral human development and also coordinated the work of the Vatican's Migrants and Refugee section in Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. Dylan previously worked with the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, Department of Justice, Peace and Human Development, as well as with the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. So thank you, Dylan. Immediately to my right is Cecilie Kern, the global policy and research advocate with Mercy International Association, where she focuses on connecting Mercy experiences at the grassroots to international advocacy and the United Nations. Cecilie currently serves as the chair of the NGO Committee on Migration, a civil society coalition engaging on the wide range of migrant and refugee issues with the UN member states and UN entities for advocacy and action. Thank you. And last, but definitely not least, to my immediately right is Melanie. Nezer is the Women's Refugee Commission's Vice President for Advocacy and External Relations. Melanie and her team share WRC's research and recommendations with policymakers, supporters, and the wider public in the United States and at the global level to improve the lives and protect the rights of women, children, and youth displaced by conflict and crisis. Melanie has over 25 years of experience in this work, and I suggest you check out her TED Talk, which has over 2 million views. It's about the fundamental right to seek asylum. So thank you. So I guess we can go down the line. And so Melanie, I'll start with you about the question of the moment. And if you could, I gave just brief, very brief bios of you all, but if you could explain to the audience what you are working on right now and what you are doing in this particular moment.
This okay? Can you hear me? Okay. I know I sound like a pack-a-day smoker, but I'm just at the end of a cold, so bear with me. Well, what do we do? Well, we had to rip up our strategic plan from 2 years ago and kind of think anew of how we were going to proceed in this moment. WRC has been around for 35 years. We are not a service provider organization. We do research and advocacy. And our target globally has been the humanitarian system to make sure that it's responsive to the needs of women and girls. And so that work is now quite challenging because the humanitarian system has been completely decimated. So our targets of, international organizations providing direct services on the ground and making sure that they do so in a way that women and girls get what they need in particular, those organizations are now, struggling to survive. There's no USAID anymore. There's no PRM funding, State Department funding. I'm in the Washington office. I've been in Washington for 30 years-ish. I can't, for those of you that come from Washington, you know how just devastated, everybody has, we have so many friends that have lost their jobs or taken the fork in the road or, all of the layoffs. And so we're, trying to figure out, so that was one piece of the work. How do we have an impact globally on the health and safety of refugee and displaced women and girls at a time when the humanitarian system is completely, needing to be transformed. And then internationally, and then domestically, our work is really at the center of gender and migration. So what are the impacts of these policies, particularly on women and girls? And we've come up with a couple of, well, we have a few answers. One of the things that we're really focused on right now is pregnant women in detention. There is a black box. We know that there are pregnant women in immigration detention. There's 65,000 people being detained. We know Senator Ossoff managed to visit a detention center and he saw women who were clearly pregnant, lactating women, postpartum women. But there's all of the reporting mechanisms are being completely ignored. So we're trying to find out what's going on. We're hearing devastating stories about pregnant women who aren't allowed to take milk or an apple back to their, cell. They have to rely on commissary food, which if any of you know about immigration detention, it's, Doritos and things like that, with things that you do not want to nourish your body with when you are pregnant. But we can't get into the facilities like we used to. Even during Trump 1, we could go in and see, we could go with Know Your Rights presentations, or we could go and monitor. Access has been completely cut off. So we are going to Mexico and Guatemala and Honduras. My colleague likes to say we had to go to 5 cities in 3 countries to find out what's going on in our own country, because we are interviewing service providers and women and people have been deported to find out what's going on in detention facilities there. So we have a big report coming out on that. We also have the first ever pregnancy tracker. We're working with Austin Kocher, I always forget how to say his name. And trying to find out from service providers, from healthcare professionals, from others, like if they come into contact with a pregnant woman who's been in detention, what's going on? Can you report it to us? So we just launched that recently. So we're doing everything that we can. We're actually partnering with Physicians for Human Rights to do medical exams of deported women who are pregnant to find out, so we can document, because really that's all we can do right now, is monitor and mitigate. That's our mantra right now. Tell the story, get the word out there, create a record so that we can eventually someday say, this is what happened, and hopefully it won't happen again. And then mitigate harm wherever we can. So that's what we're doing on that. And then the other thing that we're finding, again, this is less particular to women, but is one of the areas that we're focusing on, is family separation, the new family separation, which isn't happening the way it happened in Trump 1 at the border. What's happening is women are being picked up in court. They may have their baby with them, but their 10-year-old is with a babysitter at home, and they are detained and deported, and they are frantic because they don't know what's going on with their kids. So that is happening in huge numbers right now, and that's only going to get worse. So I know a lot of us are going to focus on that. And we have to tell the story, because again, we don't have the same images that we had in Trump 1 of babies being pulled from their mother's arms, but it is happening, probably even at a larger scale. So there's a lot I can talk about. Globally, what we're trying to do is show the impact of US aid cuts, foreign aid cuts on women. We just did a report on the impact of GBVs, the decimation of gender-based violence services in Honduras, for example. When the US cut off aid, the services, GBV services in Honduras, which has one of the worst incident rates of violence against women in the hemisphere, if not the world, decreased by 60 to 100%. So those services are no longer existent. So I could go on, and hopefully I'll have a chance to talk more, but I want to make sure that my colleagues have a chance to share.
Yes, and we'll definitely delve a little bit deeper. Dylan, can you tell us the landscape?
Sure. Thanks, Christina. Thanks, Melanie. The landscape. Well, you heard some from Father Brian about what's going on at the border. But it's a dramatically different landscape, and it changed on 20 January. The change was radical. The change was quick. The change was across the board. The change was without exception. And it came even as the president was delivering his inaugural remarks, as he was being sworn in. In El Paso, as the president was giving that inauguration speech, people were being denied their CBP-1 appointments at the bridge. That's how quickly it came. They did more in a few minutes than they did during the first 4 years of the Trump administration, the first term. The landscape there's probably 3 features. One, the denial of human suffering, and the denial of our responsibility before that suffering. During the Biden administration wasn't perfect. And a lot of us at the border, even in spaces like this, we get accused of being implacable agitators, never content with anything. But we built up a system, advocates, faith communities, people in the trenches, people across the country, organizations like WRC. People had pulled together to put together the beginning of a system of managing migration with some humanity and with some efficiency. So you had things like CBP-1. You had international agencies like the UNHCR and the International Organization for Migration. You had big international nonprofits, Save the Children and others that had come down to fill in the gaps. There was support for local governments that were providing shelter services, support for local NGOs that were providing basic services for people crossing. The government had even begun to make investments in Border Patrol. In El Paso, we got a large Border Patrol facility to be able to move in the direction of more humane processing. So there was a lot that was achieved over the Biden administration, and none of it was a gift from the Biden administration. None of it was a concession. Those were all things that the people in the room and people across the country and us at the border, we had all fought for many, many, many years to be able to put in place. It wasn't perfect. It didn't meet the needs of everybody, but there was something. And then that vanished on 20 January. It was all gone. And so now there's that complete denial of suffering. So no more asylum, intentional disinvestment in humane management at the border, and intentional investment in processes and institutions and mechanisms of criminalization and deterrence. So now we have just outside El Paso, for miles and miles to the east and miles to the west into New Mexico, we have military installations, fictional military installations. The military has just taken possession of the border so that people pass through, including migrants that can be charged for trespassing. We now have in El Paso the largest military, it's on a military base, and that's not unintentional, detention center now in the country that can house up to 5,000 people. There's a massive disinvestment in humane management, in efficient management, and massive investment now that's going on in militarization and criminalization. The second feature is that, and this is something I think that doesn't touch home just for us, but is germane for the discussion that we're having nationally and what you're seeing across the country in Los Angeles and Chicago, now perhaps beginning in Boston and other parts of the country. This march, and the bishop mentioned it this morning, march towards authoritarianism. We've been seeing that a lot in Texas lately. Since 2021, the state of Texas has invested more than $11 billion in deploying the National Guard and in over-policing our border communities. Racial profiling, targeting people because they're migrants, targeting people who help migrants. And now you're beginning to see that expand and leak into other parts of the country with these ICE arrests, with the deployment of the National Guard, with the deployment of the military, the Pentagon, to other parts of the country. Texas was the beta test for what's happening. And the president, during his campaign, mentioned that that was going to happen. He was going to take that Texas model. And so we're living through another wave of that march towards authoritarianism that's been beta tested long at the border. That's very troubling. And then just the third thing is that we're not just a border community, we're also a community in the interior. So we also see the deportations that you're seeing across the country. We've got 52,000 people who are undocumented. You know that 4 million children right now have at least one parent who's undocumented. 8 million children live in a mixed household. And in El Paso, we got 52,000 of these folks. And the number of US citizen children who live with an undocumented parent's even higher. It's 1 out of 3 of these 52,000 folks have a US citizen child. So as we move towards mass deportations, that's going to represent an economic, a moral, and a social crisis, the likes of which we haven't seen. Yeah, that's the landscape.
Murad?
Sure, thank you. And thank you all for being here for this conversation. My name is Murad Awawdeh. I'm the president and CEO of the New York Immigration Coalition. It's incredibly surreal that I'm sitting here after the last time being here was when I was at student orientation at Fordham. And I was definitely politically activated before Fordham, but Fordham gave me the tools I needed to actually think through how to process my own internal mentality to navigate some of this work. In the previous panel, there was a question, and before I get started, I just want to go back to it for a second. It was the last question that was asked about what to do about the Palestinians. I'm Palestinian. I'm also a proud Palestinian Muslim American. And I think in all issues related to the moment we're living in right now, the number one issue in the United States that leads to migration and immigration is our foreign policy. And if we continue to have the same or worse, it will be the same or worse conditions. So, and it's okay to say Palestine, it's okay to say Palestinian, it's okay to say that what is happening is horrendous, whatever term you want to use, ethnic cleansing, genocide, whatever it is, describe it for what it is. Palestinians do not want to leave their lands. Most immigrants do not want to leave their home. Imagine yourself, would you want to leave your home if it was absolutely unsafe for you to stay? That is the question we should be asking. There's the second part to that question that I would have wanted to answer is we have really mainstreamed inhumanity. Mainstreamed it to the level I thought we would never get to, where having differing of opinions can lead to political violence. And it's been happening for a long time. But we cannot continue to allow the purveyors of hate continue to own the narrative of what is and is not humane. At the New York Immigration Coalition, we are the oldest and largest immigrant rights organization. We have over 220 organizations across the state of New York, the vast majority of them here in New York City. I would say the moment we are in, I think I've been with this organization for 12 years, and over the past 5 years have been leading it. And I don't recall a non-crisis moment in the world of immigration. It was a crisis when Obama was doing the most deportations ever. It was a crisis when Trump came in the first time around. It was a crisis when Biden mishandled the response for the influx of individuals fleeing their homes because of unsafe conditions. And now we're in another crisis. And top that all off with COVID, right? So I think that the moment we're living in right now is a compounding of 16 years of really horrifying anti-immigrant policies that continue to become even worse. A lot of what we are seeing right now is Trump actually using the systems that are already in place. He's not innovated anything. He is building them out further. In New York, over the past several years, We saw an influx of nearly 500,000 people come to New York City from Texas and the southern border, many of which were sent by Governor Abbott intentionally, right? To use people as political pawns. So when I go back to we've mainstreamed inhumanity, that is what I am talking about. When I remember welcoming one of the first buses and a young mother came out of the bus, unbeknownst to us, with a baby on her shoulder, with a blanket wrapped around her, looking like she was incredibly cold. So our staff walked up to her and asked her if she was okay, and she said, "No, I'm not." And that's when we learned 3 days prior, she had just given birth to the baby under the blanket. So when we talk about inhumanity, that is inhumanity. When we talk about what do our families want, what are we fighting for, if not for our families and freedom? That is it. And now under this administration, we are seeing the most egregious violations of US law and international law. And there is no checks and balances right now. We are getting some wins in the courts, but those are not enough. Just last week, the Supreme Court said it is okay to racially profile Latinos based on their accent, their language, where they work. In what world would you think that that is normal in the United States of America? At the NYC, we have been responding to everything that's been happening. As you all may have seen an article that came out a couple weeks ago in the New York Times about of the highest arrests that have been happening in courthouses across the United States, with more than 50%, more than half happening here in New York City. We were raising the alarm on this in May, saying there's something weird happening here. People are getting arrested in the courts as they're navigating the process to adjudicate their application. So if you want to talk about people, quote unquote, doing anything the right way or wrong way, there is no right or wrong way. But under those frameworks that people have put out, these individuals are doing it the right way. And they're being tricked and trapped and then detained and disappeared. That has been happening since May and continues to escalate. I have 1 minute left and I'm going to make it very quick. Nothing this administration is doing is about safety and security. It's about cruelty. It's about creating more chaos. It's about pushing people further into the shadows. And that is their point. They want that. Because every indicator tells you that immigration is good for this country. And we're going to start seeing the flip side of what happens when people exit en masse on their own or forcefully, as we're seeing. And that is going to be a wake-up call. And I hope that that wake-up call is one where we see beyond each other and the other.
Thanks, Christina, and good morning, everyone. It really is an honor to be here with all of you, all of you. There are so many committed leaders and advocates and practitioners and dear friends and colleagues in this room. So many thanks to CMS for inviting me to be here. Christina, as you mentioned, I represent the Sisters of Mercy, Mercy Associates, and Partners in Mission across 47 countries and territories at the United Nations. And I know that there are some of you who might not know about the work that Catholic congregations do at the UN. So I'll explain that a little bit before providing some reflections on the state of affairs at the UN. So in my role, it's my responsibility to bring the collective passion of communities that are deeply rooted in the lived experiences of migration into the global policymaking space. Mercy International Association connects local knowledge and justice work with global policy, prioritizing responses to two big priority justice issues: the degradation of Earth and the displacement of persons. And through our special consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations and in coalition with other Catholic congregations, we maintain our presence at the UN to advocate for human dignity, peace, and justice, drawing on centuries of moral teaching and concrete global experience. Our main mission is to facilitate communication, so carrying the stories and concerns and expertise of Mercy people and communities and ministries at the grassroots to global policy spaces, while ensuring that international agreements and standards are reflected also in local actions. And we strive to be a moral voice at the UN, standing in solidarity with the most vulnerable and echoing the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development and the call to leave no one behind and to reach the furthest behind first. As faith-based organizations, we build common ground with secular institutions around peace and justice and human rights, guided by our tradition to welcome the stranger among us. And we bring not only our values, but also pragmatic, evidence-based insights drawn from ministries and projects that fill critical gaps where government support might be lacking. Our experience reminds us that migrants often turn to faith communities when excluded from public services, making our advocacy and practical support indispensable to ensuring that people on the move can do so in safety and dignity. And at the UN, our mission compels us to communicate policy developments back to our global network to bridge the gap between high-level debate and the realities on the ground. We recognize the privilege of being able to access the UN space and the responsibility that it entails to align our ministries with international standards and to hold governments accountable for their global commitments. Our advocacy is shaped by what we call the Mercy Justice Advocacy approach, which is a participatory model that is informed by compassion and human rights, but also Catholic social teaching and critical feminism, research and reflection. It grounds us in who we are, it sharpens our analysis of the systems that we seek to change, and it places the voices and needs of those most affected by injustice at the center of our action. An example of this approach is our publication that's called Breaking Boundaries, a Mercy Response to People on the Move. And it was a collaborative work that highlights Mercy's hands-on engagement, accompanying migrants through perilous journeys, upholding their rights, and offering essential services and belonging. And I'm glad the Sisters of Mercy at the US-Mexico border already got a shout out from Father Brian. They do amazing work building skills and confidence and dignity of migrant women who are just trying to provide an opportunity for their families after taking really heartbreaking and perilous journeys. And at the center of the work, the accompaniment of women religious in shelters and detention centers is that relentlessness that you were talking about. And so our publication demonstrates how we translate the grassroots compassion into policy recommendations aimed at making migration systems more people-centered and rights-based. So looking at where we stand at the UN, this month, right now, the UN is opening the 80th session of the General Assembly. And at this defining moment, the multilateral system is deeply fragile. It's strained by very complex political dynamics and severe funding challenges. Geopolitical tensions, mistrust between major powers paralyze key UN bodies, especially the Security Council, and limit the institution's ability to act decisively on conflicts and global crises, including mass atrocities. Competing national interests, unilateral actions by some member states, I wonder who, undermine the cooperative spirit that multilateralism depends on and have led to backsliding and hard-fought hard-fought human rights commitments. And at the same time, the UN faces really staggering financial shortfalls. The US, as the largest donor, as has already been mentioned, has cut or frozen significant funding portions that really affect humanitarian aid and peace operations and hampers the UN's ability to respond effectively to humanitarian needs. I'm going to go faster.
More questions too. We can come back to it.
Sure. Okay. Maybe I'll talk about the migration space in more detail at a different question. But I just want to maybe wrap up this part with saying that the challenges that the UN system is facing are surmountable. And we advocate that the multilateral system is still crucial for global peace, justice, and sustainable development. and that in this time of polycrisis, multilateral cooperation is more essential than ever. Protecting and strengthening the UN is important not just for the institution, but as a platform for collective action and holding governments accountable for their shared commitments.
Thank you. Well, Cecilie, I'm glad you ended on collective action. And Dylan, I'm going to start this question with you and we'll loop around because there is something to be said about coalition building or, the good old fashioned safety in numbers. And so can you all talk to us a little bit more about some of the organizations you're working with who are helping you do this work that we should be made aware of and also beware of alphabet soup since not everyone knows some of these acronyms?
Sure. Yeah, on the border, we wouldn't be able to do any work without collaborating. There just aren't the resources. There's an abundance of human capital and imagination and talent and aspiration, but in terms of resources, we've long had to do this work in a context where there's been a disparity of resources or resource famine. So we couldn't get by without collaboration. And I think that's the other thing about the border is that the border, there are so many things that divide us at the border, whether it's immigration policy or the economic inequality or the checkpoints, or the surveillance state, the ever-growing surveillance state. But on the border, we're neighbors to one another. We continue to choose. It's a choice to be neighbors to one another. Human fraternity is a choice. We talked about human fraternity last night, I think. And that's a choice to engage the other as a neighbor. But that's the miracle of what happens on border communities. I started, I was pretty dystopian in my remarks. So I'd be remiss to say that, if I didn't say that border communities, despite all those things, continue to be really resilient. People cross the border every day. Goods and services cross the border every day. Students, workers, family members, people who engage in ministry cross the border every day. And those are choices. And we need to multiply those transactions in order to affirm our humanity. And it's also true in the immigrants' rights space. We wouldn't be able to work together without support from our coalition partners across the country. The Catholic Church is a wonderful network. The religious communities, men and women, religious communities that are in El Paso, they do so much of the work every day, the yeoman's work in meeting the needs of people who migrate. Local government. We've been able in Texas, which is a really hostile environment. If you didn't know, it's pretty red. But despite all those things, one of the things that we're doing right now is doubling down on working with our local government officials in order to make sure that we can limit some of that collaboration with the federal government that's going on across the country. It's really important. Even in a red environment like Texas, some of that work is still possible. So working with local government, working with other organizations, community organizations, community organizing initiatives. Those are the type of things that can be done even in an adversarial environment right now. And I think that this is the moment to do that work. It's going to be really hard to achieve anything positive right now. So we're in a team building environment. This is a moment for team building. This is a moment to shore up the team, the Catholic team, the team of community organizations. This is the moment to build those linkages. And it's just part of the spirit of who we are at the border. We wouldn't be able to work otherwise.
Thank you. Murad, are there any specific organizations in New York or across the country or even internationally that you're working with?
Yeah. As the co-chair of the Fair Immigration Reform Movement, FIRM is about 43 states. So there are organizations like the New York Immigration Coalition, coalitions of organizations doing work on behalf of immigrant communities. We've been working across the board in what people would call red states, blue states, purple states. I just call them states because they all have their unique issues. And even in where you think you should have easier, access to integration, you don't. So they're all states. We're in 43 states. We work across the board with each other. So here in New York, the lessons we learn in real time, we share them, and they do the same. So in Illinois, we have our sister organization, the Illinois Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition. In California, we have CHIRLA, which is the Coalition for Humane Immigration, forgetting their last two acronym letters, So we learned from them what they did when LA was first targeted by the Trump administration with the National Guard and the military, then kicked it over. Unfortunately, it happened in DC now. It's still happening in both places. And they're doing higher enforcement, even though they said that they're not going to Chicago now. They are in Illinois and they're doing enforcement across the board there. Here locally, we've been working with a lot of our members, as well as Jews for Economic and Justice, who are doing amazing work with us, and the Professional Staff Congress Union, which is a union of professors and those who work within universities, as well as mutual aids. And that through that work, we are mobilizing people to the courthouses to accompany and escort people. We're also working on helping find immigration legal assistance for individuals collectively. And then just 2 weeks ago, there was a raid that happened in Cato, New York, which is about 30 miles outside of Syracuse. Probably the largest workplace raid that has happened in New York State recent history. What they don't talk about in that raid is that the vast majority of the workers were women, and the vast majority of them were mothers, and some were also pregnant. So when that raid happened, our staff and our members and our partners mobilized to the manufacturing facility, and we're witnessing ICE trying to get into the facility and with their crowbars and whatever, because they didn't have a warrant for the individuals. They had some weird action to take on the business owners, but there was no action on the business owners. They used that as the cover that they needed to get in to detain and arrest the workers. Many of the mothers who were arrested, some were new mothers, and we were able to successfully release 3, and then there were 3 left. Last week, we were told that they were going to be released on supervised release, and then turns out that they just moved them to Texas. So now we have to figure out that question that was asked earlier of like, what happens to the kids? The day of the raid, we were coordinating with the school districts. Where this happened is across multiple counties. So Oswego, Fulton, and others, to make sure that the kids were actually not left at home, dropped off at the bus stop. And at the same time that the younger kids who were in daycare or where their parents had to pick them up, that someone was there from their family to pick them up. So the rapid response work is happening. We're also preemptively doing family planning and preparation where, unfortunately, if you should dictate to someone what you want to happen to your children, your finances, your assets, and pre-plan just to be on the safe side in case something like this happens. So a lot of our work also is working with our membership across the entire state on family preparedness in this moment to ensure that parents, loved ones know what the individual's, requests are if they were to ever get detained. Because what we're seeing now is that depending on which agency is doing the enforcement, we may or may not have access to the individual who gets detained to begin with. So people were detained by Border Patrol in their barracks across upstate New York, which means that there is no real way of communicating with them. And when we were sending lawyers to go speak with them, lawyers were turned away because it's a barracks, not a detention facility. And they're using these different tactics to really make sure that people don't have access to their family, their community, and their local support. So we're navigating in this moment, and through our partnerships in our coalition, we're able to respond back as quickly as a raid just got in. We got word that there was a raid, and then within 15 minutes, we had over 50 people there. The same in Rochester last week when there was a raid of roofers. And people in the community mobilized and pushed them back. And unfortunately, they did take one person, but others were not taken.
Thank you. Cecilia, can you tell us a little bit about some of the coalitions you all are building and maybe some specific organizations in New York or across the country or even internationally?
Yeah, definitely internationally. So in the very challenging political environment that we are experiencing, there's also been a shrinking space for civil society and for meaningful participation at the UN. There have been a lot of bureaucratic hurdles and limited resources to facilitate effective participation that have really created a lot of bottlenecks that inhibit this flow of diverse voices into global decision making. And so one of the ways that we try to overcome those hurdles is by working in coalition with like-minded organizations to build solidarity and to collaborate to advocate with a strong collective voice. So Mercy International Association has been a longstanding member of the NGO Committee on Migration, and I currently serve as chair of the NGO Committee on Migration. One of our founding mothers is here. Some of our other members who represent other congregations of women religious. The NGO Committee on Migration is a committee of NGOs in consultative status with the UN. It was created in 2006 to organize civil society organizations engaging on the range of migrant and refugee issues with UN member states and UN entities in New York and Geneva. And we focus on intergovernmental processes, particularly the process around the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration, also the Global Forum on Migration and Development, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, lots and lots of other UN-y, jargony sounding names. But we have 4 active thematic subcommittees that work on children and migration, climate mobility, mixed migration, and xenophobia, racism, and social inclusion. And so those priorities really shape our advocacy towards our ultimate objective, which is to realize justice and rights and dignity for people on the move at the ground, not up in fancy language UN land, but really for people on the ground. And the NGO Committee on Migration itself belongs to an even larger network of networks of civil society organizations and movements from all regions of the world that includes faith-based organizations and migrant-led organizations, trade unions, and others who join together to drive collective strategy and organizing, engagement, and action. And among those is the Civil Society Action Committee, which is the largest global platform for coordinated civil society advocacy on international migration governance and policy. And some of those colleagues are also here. We also co-convene the Grassroots Forum for Migration Governance, which focuses on raising the voices and building the capacity of grassroots leaders by facilitating timely information sharing and strategic collective advocacy. We work to amplify diverse perspectives to make sure that the realities that migrants experience, especially marginalized migrants, are heard in international policy spaces. And beyond building alliances of civil society organizations, we also partner closely with local authorities through groups like the Mayor's Migration Council or United Cities and Local Governments, UN agencies like the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And of course, we meet with like-minded governments to shape rights-based, people-centered migration policies. And by developing strong relationships with stakeholders with different expertise and different decision-making power, we're better able to positively impact negotiations. In the migration space specifically, we're looking forward to the 2026 International Migration Review Forum, which is the follow-up and review mechanism for the Global Compact for Migration. And so I won't describe exactly what the Global Compact for Migration is, but you can look it up. This is a challenging moment to have this particular review. Even as humanitarian language persists at the UN in discourse and rhetoric, the reality is we see on the ground, every one of you has noticed it, the slide towards state control and authoritarianism. The very principles that the UN was founded on, human rights, protection, dignity, inclusion, are all under siege. And the environment really makes advocacy for compassion and justice like more urgent than ever before. We're really concerned that there is a coalition or a group of like-minded right-wing governments that's mobilizing ahead of this International Migration Review Forum and is promoting this rising tide of restriction and securitization. And the US is right there with them. And the policies that the US is implementing now is setting a devastating precedent. What was previously one of the world's most powerful democracies is modeling cruelty rather than compassion and weaponizing deterrence instead of upholding human rights. And this isn't contained within US borders, it reverberates globally. Other governments point to the United States to deflect responsibility and attention from their own rollbacks of migrant protections and echo the rhetoric of exclusion and use it as a shield for their abuses. Kevin mentioned the State Department or the U.S. mission site event that's coming up next week to tear apart the current humanitarian framework, the 1951 Convention, the 1967 Protocol. And so we have a responsibility as civil society to call out the backsliding and to really uphold migrant rights and the international protections for people seeking asylum. We can't normalize this race to the bottom where rights are eroded in the name of sovereignty and humanity is sacrificed for the sake of political expedience.
Thank you. Cecilia, back to the original question, which is, what are some of the organizations that, Melanie, I am my mother. I use your name. Some organizations locally, nationally or internationally that you're thinking of?
So I'm not gonna, we work in coalition, obviously, all the time. None of us could do any of this work alone. But instead of kind of giving out that list, because we work in a lot of the coalitions together, there is one I want to talk about. But I was just thinking about the theme here, which is finding hope. And I was telling Mario I was having a hard time doing that. But I think one of the things that we can think about is
That's our next question. So,
Oh.
so you can still answer the coalition question. You're going to get to the
coalitions.
Okay.
It's about coalitions. It's something like, Bishop Seitz talked a little bit about this, and it's, if there is some hope here, it's the de-siloing of our coalitions. So we work, Women's Refugee Commission, obviously we work on behalf of displaced and refugee women. But, we've been more and more trying to reach out to advocacy groups that care about the rights of women in the United States and globally, and tell them if you care about women's rights and safety, it means you have to care about immigrants. So why aren't we working together more? And we are now actually working together more. I think this, this crisis moment has really made us realize we have to work across coalitions. If you care about the environment, if you care about children's welfare, we have a project that we're working on that hasn't launched quite yet. The local children's, welfare agencies, state and local child welfare agencies don't track children's immigration status because immigration has never been a reason why they've intervened in families. But now, with what's going on, and we've all been talking about it, with the family separations, more and more children are coming to child welfare agencies. We're not tracking that yet. So we're trying to make sure we have a pilot project in the works to track that. But these are, we haven't thought across those of us who are working for a more just, humane, safe world for all of us. How do we really create those ties and work together? So maybe what's hopeful is that we're going to start to have to do that. And that's a really good thing. And I think will really help, bend the arc, which is what's, towards justice. Because the way we've been working, just, I think we have to be realistic about and assess, there's a lot less funding now. There are a lot less resources. We're all kind of operating out of a scarcity and fear mindset. And we're worried about the people that we, that our mission is about, but we're also worried about ourselves and our organizations and our colleagues. And so I think that's one thing. The other thing is, I think building trust, really building those personal relationships. And Murad, you talked about COVID. I think that weakened us. There are people here, Bill Kenny and Kevin Appleby, we've been like on the Hill together for 20 years. And you build that trust. And it's harder to do that when you're not in person, you're not having lunch together, you're not meeting up. So we have to keep doing that. Anna, too, you too. Where we just have these decades of relationships that are built up, and it's harder. It's easier now to just get on a Zoom, get off a Zoom, but we need to be intentional about that. It may seem frivolous, but get coffee, talk to each other, get together for drinks, whatever, because we need to build that trust back up so we can really work together. The other thing is like, the people call it like a purity test or big tent, small tent. We have to be able to kind of bridge our differences or like put those things aside because the big picture, we're all aligned. So those things that we don't necessarily agree with, we can name a bunch of them, but in any sense, like we need to make sure that we don't have that, we need to have a unity of purpose. The other side is pretty good about that. but there's a lot of infighting and sniping and all of that stuff that needs to stop because, so much is at stake. So when I say, about coalitions, I think there's a real opportunity here to build broader coalitions with a bigger picture in mind. And I just want to talk about one coalition that I love. We actually sponsored it at Women's Refugee Commission. It's called GRIN, the Global Refugee Youth Network. And I guess that's my last point is like a lot of us, all the systems that we're used to in terms of influence, administrative advocacy, we're not doing that anymore. The Hills kind of broken down, all of, grassroots organizing, everyone's so stressed because there's so much going on and so much to be worried about that they don't know what to do. All of those systems that we're used to are, have broken down. We need to look to the younger people. Like, how do we get the message out in ways that we don't really know how to do? I mean, I don't say all of us, so those of you who are students at Fordham who are here, like we're relying on you to come up with the new ways to spread the message, build trust, create coalitions and all of that. So I think we need to bring in kind of the younger generation who knows how to use these tools that we're not maybe, we didn't grow up with and know how to use so well. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Melanie. I think, young people obviously continuously hold the key to many of these, the answers to many of these issues that we face. We saw it during the civil rights movement, and we're going to see it again. So since you kind of jumped the gun for the last hope question, because I really want to make sure we leave time for your questions, the order will be Dylan, Cecilie, and then Murad, I'll end with you just because you're a Fordham alum. But, as Sonia Sanchez always used to say when people would convene and talk about, social justice issues, she would say, well, what are the marching orders, right? We don't want to convene and then we leave and we don't really know what should we take away from this panel, from this day, from this conference. Dylan, I'll start with you. And also, very briefly, not just our marching orders and what we take away, but what is a glimmer of hope? Melanie laid out some real positives about forcing us to build short-term or long-term coalitions. We can have strange bedfellows every now and again, but what sort of does spark a glimmer of hope for you in this very dark time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think our hope has to be grounded in realism first. And so this comes from a place of pain and possibility. Pain at what's happened, everything I described that's happened at the border and everything that's happening right now across our country. I was inspired yesterday to see so many people I haven't seen in many years in this room. This is a great space, I think, to begin to bring us and knit us back together. And I've, like many of you, you've been in this for a long time. I've been in this for a long time. I remember, I've seen the different dynamics of the debate. I remember during the Obama years, the trade-offs that were going to be necessary between, for comprehensive reform and what was going to happen at the border with additional militarization. And then I saw the Trump years and, the horror of family separation, the Obama years, Rod talked about the mass deportations that we saw, and then into the the Trump years with the real pain that we saw, the pain, the populations in our country and those who are coming to the border that was inflicted on those folks. But also the rallying that took place. If you remember, there was a rallying. Our country rallied and said no to some of that injustice, and we were able to push back on that. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't perfect, and maybe we weren't able to sustain it as well as we should have. Maybe we hadn't organized as well as we should have when we got past the first Trump administration, and now where we are now, where the compromises that we have to make are different. The thing that hurt me too during the Biden administration was that I said that we had begun to build something that was hopeful, that showed us that there was a different way that you could manage migration smartly at the border and work for reform for those who were here and who needed to get here. But there was a poverty of political imagination at the same time. There were gains, but there was a real poverty of political imagination. And I think you saw that towards the end of that administration when it wasn't just a compromise between the border and comprehensive immigration reform. You had the border bill, which a lot of people on the left politicians supported, where there was no trade-off. It was just more enforcement. There was nothing. There was nothing. It wasn't a Faustian bargain. There was no bargain at all. And then at the top of this year, we got to the Lakin-Riley Act, which was supported by many Democratic politicians. And so I say that because I think we're at rock bottom right now in terms of where we are in terms of our political imagination. And I liked how Bishop Seitz framed it. Maybe we ought not to go back. Maybe we ground our hope right now in the realism that we're at rock bottom. And yet, the people that we work with, the resilience of migrant communities, the years of experience and wisdom and hope that's in this room, we can knit that together and we can ground it on something that's more sustainable, solid, and that will benefit our people, our country, and those we work with.
Thank you. Cecilia and then Murad, we've got about a minute and a half each. So marching orders and glimmer of hope, please.
Sure, I will try my very best. One of the things that is giving me hope is something that we launched at the Global Forum for Migration and Development just over a week ago. We did something we've never done before, which is we launched a campaign. And so the campaign is grounded around the principles resist, reclaim, realize. And so we resist the pervasive dehumanization, criminalization, xenophobia faced by migrant communities, and resist the silencing of migrant voices and the intimidation of human rights defenders. By harnessing the collective power of civil society within international spaces, we reclaim the narrative and influence over migration policy by asserting that civil society's rightful and central role is to drive positive policy and grounded in evidence-based policies and practices. And then we realized, or we are working to realize, the transformative future for migration that we're talking about, this kind of reimagining of the global governance space around migration. We're still in the super early days of this campaign, so we have a lot of activities that are still kind of in the pipeline. But we do have a campaign website and things that we can share. But just to kind of frame a general closing with the 3 R's: to resist is not only to oppose, but it's to build. To reclaim is not only to recover what is lost, but to shape the future anew. And to realize is not just to dream, but to act with strategy and purpose. And this is why we come together. The rollback of human rights is not inevitable. Shrinking of civil society spaces can't go unchallenged, and another future is possible. And this is an opportunity and an obligation to set the tone for years to come, to resist the erosion of rights and to reclaim power and dignity, and to realize a world where migration policy is rooted in justice and humanity and hope.
Thank you so much, Cecilie. Before, Murad, you give us our last moment, I want you all to start thinking about your questions. Don't forget, Q&A is for you to have a Q and for them to have the A, right? So we want to have it be as succinct as possible. So start thinking about it, write it down if you need to. This, unfortunately, we want to try and get as many questions as possible, so this is not the time for manifestos. We can do that during break and during lunch, okay? All right, Murad.
So, I always go back to, in the darkest of nights, the stars shine brightest. And for me, every day is a new tragedy, a new crisis, a new challenge that we have to figure out. But what gives me hope is actually the people who actually stand up to address those challenges. And those are the people like you all in this room. And figuring out what your lane is to fight back. You might organize your local neighborhood, fight back table. You might be the one who's going to respond if there's an ICE raid down the road from you. You might be the one who's a lawyer and I'm going to do my Immigration 101 course so that I can start helping out with supporting individuals or showing up to a protest or donating to an organization. I think that there is a role for every single person to actually activate themselves. That's first and foremost. And I've been seeing that. And that's been giving me immense hope in moments where we think we're going to be standing, just the NYC and our members alone, and seeing thousands and tens of thousands of New Yorkers standing up with us. And that's also being reflective in every poll you look at. I don't want to get political or anything in this space, but if you look at, the president's approval ratings versus immigration, you're seeing that the polling on immigration and the favorability of immigration and what's happening is actually increasing, right? It was like 70-something% a week or two ago. That's not been seen in some time. And there are glimmers of hope, and we have to also remember to always celebrate, and like acts of joy are acts of resistance too. A week ago, we had an event at the Peril Performing Arts Center and the World Trade Center, celebrating immigrant stories. And I'm not a person who has I wish I had more time to go to the arts and, to theater. And it was an event my organization was holding, so I went to it. And it was probably the most uplifting thing. So my challenge to you all in going on this hopeful tune is everything is so dark. Be the star, but also look for something that you're doing for yourself in this moment, right? It could be a play, it could be a story, it could be a poetry, drama, comedy show, whatever it is, because it is so easy for us to get so worn down that we don't want to do anything. And that's a tactic that they are using to employ against us. So my hope is that we all step into our own power, fighting for our own dignity, because we are not the only ones under attack as immigrants. They're using immigrants as a test case right now to go after everyone else's rights, because that's literally what's happening. If you saw the report from yesterday, Marco Rubio and Rep. Mast are introducing a bill about taking away U.S. citizens' passports for anti-American values and viewpoints. So I'll stop there because I know I'm getting a note.
This will be your third note, sir.
I know.
So I will say this, and I want to thank you for that, just because, I said during Trump 1, I said, this man will not put me in an early grave. He'll be fine, but it's the stress of it all. And so you suggest I go to the arts. I'm a Knicks season ticket holder. I believe in making sure you work hard and you rest. But what I have done is I go birding. I feel like in this moment, nature is actually a very good solve for what we are experiencing. So I would say hug a tree, link up with someone. It's great to get your steps in, but there is something about seeing birds being free that reminds us of a certain type of freedom that we can have and can attain. So that's my plug for birding. For the students in here, take Sarah Zimmerman's birding class. It's great in the English department. Okay, how are you all doing Q&A? So you're gonna start us off and you're gonna be the model of how to ask a tight question.
I'm gonna ruin this. Two quick things. Number one, in the spirit of collaboration, Isaac Cuevas, I am the Director of Immigration and Public Affairs for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. We are at ground zero of all this. We do have a model for Jeanette, who asked earlier about training priests, women religious, and deacons on accompaniment to immigration court. I've got a video training series, email templates, sign-up sheets, you name it. Come find me, shoot me a note. Happy to share that all with anybody who needs it. Number one down. Number two, this question is for Dylan. Dylan, you talked about collaboration with government entities. One of the big things that we did under the first Trump administration was work with the State Department to help get the US-born children of undocumented immigrants US passports. People don't realize how important that is right now. What is your take on working with the State Department now under this administration in that same regard?
Yeah, I like that framework. You do the Q, we do the A. I appreciate that. My old boss, John Carr, he would say, how would he put it? Make sure at least that you try to put your comment in the form of a question. So thank you, Isaac. Yeah, it's difficult. I think, well, first of all, I think it's really important that we work with our legislators, and not just work with our legislators, but that we're able to put the pains of our community before our legislators with people power. That's super important. And that should be done with our local legislators. You should be working, with your county commissions, with your city councils, with your mayors, your county administrators, et cetera. That work is incredibly important. And sometimes that involves education, sometimes that means tension, sometimes that means agitation, but that work needs to continue. Working with the federal agencies obviously is a lot more complicated right now. You know, we've been able to work, for example, with HSI, you know, and disrupting trafficking networks because we're on the border. So there are trafficking networks, as you can imagine, between Juarez and El Paso. And there was a time when we could sit down and share information and intel, and some of that was productive and led to some good effect. Now I wouldn't have a meeting with HSI. You know, the government has weaponized all the different agencies, not just the HSI, the FBI, the US Marshals. Agencies across the board have been enlisted in this campaign of deportations. The federal government has been weaponized against the immigrant right now. And so it's incredibly tricky. It's incredibly tricky. And yet, you know, we can't give up. You know, we've got to work on a local level. I think, you know, we continue to engage our local ICE officials, at least for information sharing or to understand their point of view, or so that they understand our point of view, and to keep those relationships warm. It's incredibly tough, but it's sensitive, it's tricky. But I think that spade work has to be done, and sometimes it pays off months and years later. Definitely maintain the relationships with the not just the leadership, but the line folks, because you never know what can pay, you never know how a relationship can pay off. But yeah, keep the relationships warm. Stay true to your principles, but keep the relationships warm. Be intelligent and smart and savvy, and don't put our people in danger. But yeah, we got to be engaged in that bridge building, no doubt.
Thank you. And if you all can keep your questions tight, we can keep our answers brief so we can get in as many as possible in the next 10 minutes. See red shirt, sequel.
Thanks. Cecilia Gonzalez Andrew from Loyola Marymount University and the Academy of Catholic Hispanic Theologians of the United States. Question, following up. Is there experience from other countries that have been involved in surviving authoritarian regimes that would teach us something about what to do now? For my community, after the SCOTUS order, they can't even go to Mass, let alone can we have a meeting where we're all together. I mean, I'm scared even being here, right? My children didn't want me to get on a plane. I'm a Latina. It's dangerous, right? So what do we know from other countries? How have they survived and kept their communities safe and informed when just being this color, this voice, this person is criminalized?
Thank you. Let's take that.
Maybe I'll get started. We are reaching out to our partners in other countries to see kind of, because other countries have experienced what we are experiencing now. I'm thinking of the Philippines and other places where there's Mercy presence, where people have had to take measures to protect themselves, to protect their communities against repression from government, for speaking out, for being human rights defenders or migrant rights defenders. And so we're trying to learn as many lessons as quickly as possible. I'm struggling to think of like specific practices at the moment, but there are large networks of migrant organizations with a wide reach in many different countries that have experienced authoritarianism, have experienced really repressive regimes against marginalized communities generally, not necessarily migrants, but other communities as well. And it really is about kind of keeping each other safe, like being in solidarity with one another, keeping each other protected. And sometimes that means that like you cannot be the spokesperson on something, like reach out to someone who is in a position of privilege in that community to be the spokesperson on an advocacy point this is another reason why it's really important to have other partners, or like partners in other stakeholder groups who have different levels of power and access to power than we do, whether it is media or other, other governments. Governments pressure each other. They are peers with one another. And so sometimes when a civil society entity can't speak out for fear of repression or reprisal, we reach out to governments to say, hey, can you, like your neighbors, talk to them? Or I think I already said media, but former leaders, like there are lots of people who have power who or had power and no longer holds that position, who feel a little bit freer to speak on political issues. So yeah, there are lots of different people who have different ability to speak out in times of repression. And so again, it's about keeping relationships warm. It's about reaching out to people in other stakeholder groups who have different access and different
Okay.
kind of
Thanks.
speaking.
Sorry, I want to bring in Dylan really quickly because I want to try and get in as many more questions really briefly. So if you all panelists could keep your answers very, very brief, please.
Yeah, just very quickly to that point, there's a good data point. I'll remember the source in a minute, but looking at the experience of the 20th century, where there have been authoritarian regimes, where civil society has been able to marshal a robust response within the first 2 years, 70% of those countries were able to maintain their democracy. So we've got what, 16 months? 16 months. And it starts now. The clock starts now.
Let's stack some questions really briefly.
Hi, my name is Jade, and I'm currently a John Jay student. Since there was mention about the military deployment in around the cities and just taken away from their families, how big of an impact would it be here for New York? And is there anything we could do, since I am worried about, our community? So.
Thank you. And I love the succinct question. Let's grab one or two more and then I'll have the panelists answer.
Hi, my name is Sarah, and I'm part of the St. Francis Cabrini Shrine. We're also next to the Cabrini Immigration Services. You had mentioned in the panel at one point the importance of young people, and as this is a theme about hope, I think the opposite side of hope is fear, and there is so much fear today. So what would your message be to educate and empower young adults, young people, for someone like myself to talk to their peers about these hard conversations, or to people who are in these organizations who have young people wanting to get involved?
Thank you. Fantastic question. And we'll take one more and then I'll have the panelists answer. I see glasses and gray shirt.
Thank you. My name, excuse me, my name is Lois Haar, and I started a migration support group in my neighborhood up in the Bronx. But this is a housekeeping question in terms of, we're talking about collaboration. Will you send us all our names and all our contacts and all our information? Because there's the good people here, so
Okay.
we'd all like
Great.
to,
Thank
I
you.
think we could know each other better.
Okay, so I'll have the panels very, very briefly. We have 2 minutes. The first question was about military deployment in New York City. Murad, that seems like you. And then the last question is about young people and hope and fear, and how can we help educate young people to talk to their peers about this?
So on the first question, yes, we are planning for what is to come. We've already seen heightened enforcement across New York, and that's only going to get worse. There are several different scenarios of increasing enforcement in New York City. They may not use the military or the National Guard here. They may. So we're coming up with plans for each one. And what we're telling people is to start organizing hyper-locally. So I would tell you, the person who asked like what to do is really understand what your rights are. And I think it's even more critically important that every single person know what their rights are, because the vast majority do not, right? And really ensuring that people understand what their rights are at home, in the street, and at work. Because if you don't know what your rights are, you're giving away your rights at the second of engagement. So that's the first piece we're doing. We're doing an immense amount of core protection work right now to prepare our communities for what's to come. That includes the family preparedness that we were talking about, the KYRs, the legal screenings, and everything else. But also, what is the response? And this is a moment for civil society to stand up and push back. Because again, this doesn't come down to just immigration. This is about defending our democracy. And if we can't do that, then what are we doing?
And really quickly, Melanie is going to have the last word, and then we have to stay on track.
All right, a lot of pressure. So from the front lines in DC, where we've been experiencing this for a while, I mean, yes to all of that. Plus, I don't know if you guys have seen like the guy throwing the Subway sandwich at the, so we have a mural on U Street now that like, it's very cool. I can have it on my phone. It's, that is important too, right? The kind of keeping I don't want to say the joy, but like keeping up the fight, keeping up the resistance, posting on social media, the ridiculousness of like, we have, little clusters of 3 National Guards people hanging out, like, picking up trash. I mean, like, I mean, there's also really horrible stuff going on, but people are intervening. They're putting their bodies on the line to protect our neighbors. So all of that is important. Yeah, we need those symbols of resistance, like that just, she has to go. And then on the young people, I just want to say, don't wait to be invited to the table because you might not be. People don't relinquish power very easily. So come up with your own ways of, working together, being creative, calling organizations that you want to partner with and like consistently reaching out to them and saying, you need to be listening to us because we have ideas and that can actually move the needle in ways that you may need us. So don't wait, just, again, like use your creativity, your youth, your enthusiasm to break into these organizations and insist on being included because you have so much to offer.